I don't know what all the clicks are.
Okay, and we are up on YouTube. Hello, everybody.
Cool.
Hey.
Yes. Hello to the YouTube. Welcome to Nick Photinos' talk, in which we're going to talk about a whole bunch of different stuff. If you don't know who Nick is, you should, because he's very cool. He's a cellist and one of the founding members of Eight Blackbird. And now he's doing solo stuff. He teaches at the Bang on I Can Summer Festival, which is where I met him a couple years ago. And all around does and also runs his own festival now. So cool stuff going on, and I'll let him talk more about all that and whatever else. We're hoping to get a bunch of questions for him later on and have a nice chat.
Yeah, cool. Thank you, Shoshana and Peter. It's a pleasure to be here today talking to all of you. So I want to start by saying there's a lot of things I could talk about. I'm always the most interested to hear what questions you have for me and go in directions that people are interested in knowing about and talking about those. There's plenty of ways we could do this, but feel free, to raise your hand through Zoom or to put something in the chat, which I have up. If you have a question, like in the middle of something, we'll get to it. So do treat this like a conversation. I don't necessarily have a prepared hour-and-a-half speech or big presentation, but there's a lot of things I could talk about, and I'm happy to talk about my career and about the things that I'm doing right now. Hopefully some of it is of interest to you and is helpful to you to hear about, to learn about, and for me to hear from you as well. So I think a good place to maybe jump off a little bit is, to go a little bit into my trajectory and where I'm at now, just very briefly. So I was, as Shoshana mentioned, I am the founding cellist of Eight Blackbird. We formed in 1996. I recently, as of last year, left the group after 24 years. Which is a big step. And the decision to leave predated the pandemic, but the pandemic actually kind of cut short all of the activities that we were supposed to do. So I was supposed to end in June. It really ended up being March because everything ended in March of last year. So, and after that, I was really, and even after making that decision, I was trying to figure out what my next steps were going to be. In 24 years with Eight Blackbird, we did a lot of things. We taught at a lot of amazing places, commissioned a lot of great music. Even toward the end of my time with them, like back in 2015 and especially 2017, I released a solo album. And at that point, I was also kind of thinking about wanting to do other stuff beyond the schedule with Eight Blackbird. I mean, Eight Blackbird, especially at certain times during that 24 years, was super busy. But I also felt like there were things I wanted to do, and releasing an album was part of that. The trajectory for that a little bit was, I kind of had the idea to release an album for a long time in my head, but I wasn't sure what to put on it. And it all kind of came together when I reached out to Florent Gis. I don't know if you guys know him. I'm gonna type his name in the chat. If you don't know him, you should check him out because he's amazing. Pop influenced, French by background. He's at Princeton, really just fantastic bass player and also performer. And he had put out his own solo album called Télévision, which he wrote all the music and created all the videos for. And I was just totally blown away. And I approached him and said, hey, I really love your work. Do you have anything for cello? And he says, oh, it's funny, you should mention that. I'm working on a cello piece, but I don't have a performer. Would you be interested? And I was like, yeah, that sounds great. So I premiered this piece by him, the 6-movement piece called Petit Artifact. And it's all these short movements. A lot of his work is short, 2-3 minute movements. And it was a fantastic piece, and the title got me thinking about, little artifacts, got me thinking about all of these short pieces I had played over the years in recital, especially at the Bangor Can Summer Festival, where I've taught since 2007. And like all of a sudden, like the whole album kind of came together. And I pretty much like had the whole concept and like all the pieces. And it turned out a lot of those pieces had never been recorded either. Stuff by David Lang, by David T. Little, by Angelica Negron, Molly Joyce. So like it all like was just this fully formed idea all at once. And so I ended up releasing that in 2017. This is maybe a good time. I'll share just a quick track from that, which is fun. Let me pull that up. Hold on one second. Let me actually prep it first. Yeah, we'll do that one. So this is one of the movements from that called Information. And so what you'll hear, this is a technique that he does a lot, where he takes the voice of someone, especially doing weather reports. There's a certain fascination for him, I think partly because of like the mundane nature of it, but he tries to find the musical, find and actually amplify and harmonize the musical structure within the voice. So what you'll hear is an Iranian weather forecast that's basically been harmonized over in a really, I think, interesting way. So let's share that.
به نام خدا. سلام. سامانه باریستایی که وارد کشورمون شده بود امروز همچنان به فعالیت خودش در شمال شرق و شرق کشور ادامه داده و برای این نواحی آسمانی ابری با بارش باران و برف رو خواهیم داشت که به تدریج از میزان بارندگی ها در این نواحی کاسته شده و این سامانه باریستا از اواخر وقت از مرزهای شمال شرق از کشورمون خارج میشه. در روز دوشنبه هم سامانه باریستایی وارد کشور میشه که از روز دوشنبه بعد از ظهر برای استان‌های واقع در شمال غرب و غرب کشورمون آسمان ابری رو پیش بینی می‌کنیم که در این نواحی همراه با بارش باران خواهد بود. در مناطق سردسیر و مرتفع بارندگی‌ها به صورت برفه. طی روز سه‌شنبه سامانه گسترده‌تر شده جنوب غرب کشور رو هم در بر می‌گیره و برای جنوب غرب کشورمون هم آسمانی ابری رو همراه با بارش باران و برف رو خواهیم داشت. در روز چهارشنبه علاوه بر نوار غربی کشورمون برای استان‌های واقع در سواحل دریای خزر، دامنه‌های البرز و به تدریج شمال شرق کشورمون آسمان ابری رو پیش بینی می‌کنیم که در این نواحی همراه با بارش باران خواهد بود و در مناطق سردسیر و مرتفع بارندگی‌ها به صورت برف خواهد بود. اما از لحاظ دمایی طی امروز با توجه به استقرار کم فشار بر روی کشورمون و همچنین افزایش کشیده شدن دما به سمت سواحل دریای خزر، اما از لحاظ دمایی طی امروز با توجه به استقرار کم فشار بر روی کشورمون و همچنین افزایش کشیده شدن دما به سمت سواحل دریای خزر، افزایش دما رو برای اکثر نقاط کشورمون بین 6 تا 8 درجه پیش بینی می‌کنیم که این افزایش دما طی امروز و فردا در اکثر نقاط کشور ادامه داره و برای سواحل دریای خزر این افزایش دما رو بین 7 تا 11 درجه پیش بینی می‌کنیم که همراه با وزش باد گرم در این نواحیه. همونطور که امروز اشاره کردیم افزایش دما رو داشتیم و در حال حاضر نسبت به روز گذشته اردبیل و زاهدان 2 درجه، ارومیه، زنجان و ساری 6 درجه، تبریز، بوشهر و همدان هم نسبت به روز گذشته همین موقع 5 درجه افزایش دما پیدا کردند. از توجه و همراهی شما سپاسگزارم. خدا نگهدار.
Cool. So that's one little thing. Live transcript was pretty great there. Yeah, I want to see that. So, with that piece, this actually kind of leads into one of the topics that I'm happy to talk about for this, and I know the festival deals with a lot, is performing with live electronics, which is something that I got into much later, and actually, especially through Bang on a Can, with people like Todd Reynolds, for example, who's kind of really just a master. And I still learn a lot from him every time I meet him and see all of his gadgets and everything that he's doing. It just kind of stemmed from a desire to like learn how to interact, at first to learn how to interact with that technology to create interesting things. And then it became, playing around with that and also commissioning pieces that utilize that too, and kind of using it as an artistic tool. There's a lot of things these days. So for example, one piece I'm looking at right now that I'm going to be performing probably a week from Monday at Bang on a Can and in a recital is this very short solo piece called Power Chords. And I got this, and it's very like, and like the first thing I thought of, like, oh, this sounds exactly like, some kind of like super heavy metal things. Like, okay, I definitely want to like, so now like with tech, and especially I use Ableton, I should mention, like I'm able to add overdrive, and I'm also able to automate all of it so that like I don't have to worry about like pressing pedals. I mean, I can do that too, but I'd rather not. I like to be as hands off when I play. So it's like fewer things to worry about and press the pedal at the right time and line it up. So for me, Ableton especially has been a really great tool. First of all, just to not have to, like being on the road, like not have to carry like huge pedal boards or even pedal switches necessarily, but being able to automate as much of that stuff as possible to kind of free up my own playing so I can just concentrate on playing the notes. And I'm by no means like an Ableton expert. It's one of those things with anything, and I'm sure, well, I'll ask a question in a second about this, but it's one of those things like you never stop learning about it. And there's also people, it's interesting seeing too and learning how it's like any instrument, like everybody does a different thing with it, and they have their own workarounds and work, like how they do, how they interact with that tool is all very specific and individual, I find. So I learned a lot. For example, one of the pieces on my album was this piece by David T. Little, And the Sky Was Still There, which is actually originally a violin piece that he wrote for Todd Reynolds. And with Todd Reynolds' blessing, he was even a co-producer on the album. I included the piece for cello because it's really works really, really well for cello. And he gave me the backing track, and it was kind of, I learned so much about Ableton by deconstructing what he had done with the track and what he had automated and what he hadn't, and all the information that was in there and how it worked in performance. Because he had everything, the other nice thing about Ableton is you have everything in there for performance, but also for, eventual recording, and clicks and comp tracks and everything. So, and you can turn all of that off and on and do with it as you will. So, so I'm happy to talk a little bit about, the learning process with that or what I do with that. It's not, I will say I find myself increasingly more and more performing with live electronics and Ableton especially, just because I find, in a lot of the recital work that I do, going on the road, I don't have to then book a pianist. Also, increasingly, the things I'm doing where, for example, also on my upcoming show in a week from Monday at Bang on a Can, I'm including this arrangement I did of an Aphex Twin piece called Avril 14th that I did for like 5 or 6 cellos, but I can do that. There aren't 5 or 6 cellos at Bang on a Can this year. So I can just record all that stuff and play a multi-cello piece myself. Also doing that with a Dolly Parton piece for that too. So, so it just gives me a lot of freedom to create bigger structures and also to kind of mix things up. Having, because then there's some other stuff that I'm doing that's a more traditional, fixed media track. And I'm also, one thing I do geek out about is making my own click tracks for things, often kind of treating it as like a thing that I try to take away as much click as possible to give me freedom. There's some pieces where like I'll have a click every 5 seconds or every 10 seconds, just to kind of as markers along the way, or I'll just leave it out for certain sections if I want to have that freedom while I'm playing it, or I'll just have a letter in my ear so I know roughly where I am. So like there's like, I like the freedom also of having clicks that you can sculpt entirely versus just having this metronome in your ear. So that's one of the ways that I work with Ableton. But the question I had for all of you, and you can do this either by in the chat or by raising your hand through the Zoom feature, is about how many of you are performers? First of all, let's start with that. So we have one hand. No. How many? Some, yeah. I see some sort of hands. Okay. How many people are composers? Great. Lots of thumbs up and hands. How many people work with electronics on a regular basis? That's probably most people, I imagine, here, given this festival. So yeah, so it's I will say my path too is, especially like, coming into it, not having done that much of it, and then seeing like someone like Todd Reynolds, who's kind of lived with it his whole life and worked, or most of his life, and like at a much higher level. It can be really daunting to step into. But once you just realize that, well, a couple of things. First of all, everybody's always learning, much like music in general. And the other thing is that finding people that are knowledgeable and that are willing to give you a pointer or two, or sometimes even just being behind their back and seeing what they do, how they interact with different things, like, and then just honestly just fiddling it around with it. Like I learned so much about Ableton by just trying to do things and then failing horribly in my own personal space before I ever got on stage, and failed horribly with them. So it's just one of those things, like you just have to kind of go for it and see what it does. And so it's still one of those things that I, find myself, like I've gotten to a certain point of comfort with it where I know I'm not going to like blow out a speaker, or I'm not going to like, do something horribly wrong. Or if something horribly wrong does happen, I know how to shut it off instantly, or how to minimize it, and usually what the culprit is, like what the chain is of events that's going to lead to something bad. So yeah, I don't know. I could talk more about any of that, about Ableton. But so, the piece that I got from Florent was a Max MSP piece. And I eventually had asked him to make, because later on, that was before there was decent integration with Max and Ableton, and now there is. It's actually a big feature of it. So I had him redo it with Ableton, because every time I would perform that piece, I had to switch all my Ableton stuff. I had to like kind of go completely out of that and then into Max MSP. And like, it was just a big pain in the butt, and things would happen. And especially because there was also video for it, that it was also a live feed, it would just not play well. So a lot of things would happen during that time. And also because I'm not a Max person, like over time, it's almost like those of you here that work with Max, like there's certain things that can happen under the hood where like gremlins in it or something, I don't know, where like eventually, like there were certain parts of it, like when I eventually, like I played it a bunch and then I came back to him and he saw it, it's like, why is this file missing? Or like, why? And I'm like, yeah, I don't know why. Like there's certain things had changed about it and neither of us could figure out why. So, and then luckily the Ableton one that he wrote, even though it's still a Max patch, it's still Max for live, it's much more stable for some reason, and like does the thing that it's supposed to do more often. So yeah, but Max is still a little bit of a mystery to me. And I was just running runtime, I think it's called. So like I wasn't even looking under the hood. Like he made a really nice user interface that I could interact with, but it was still, things would happen very strangely under the hood. So this might be a good time. Are there any questions for me about any of this? I'm also happy to talk about Eight Blackbird and the ensemble dynamics within that. Yeah, key to using Macs is restart the program and try again. It's kind of like the Fonz from Happy Days, like just hit the jukebox and it'll do the right thing. Jake, do you have a question?
Yeah, hi. I have several questions. If you're, if there's like crickets and you need someone to ask questions, I have plenty, but
All
I
right.
won't hog up as much time. So I guess, I'll just pick one of my questions. So one thing that I've sort of been thinking about a lot, because I just graduated with my master's and now I'm, off into the real world, and is how, like, to be a successful musician these days, you kind of have to do like a number of things and like be like, you wear multiple hats per se. Like you have to be in Eighth Blackbird and also release your solo album and also do this and, maybe teach, maybe do this and that, maybe record something and compose, you know what I mean? So I guess my question sort of is, like besides being really good at what you do, like playing cello, or like what steps have you taken to that you think has led you to have a successful career in music? Like, has it been this sort of diversity in your skill set, or what was it, I guess?
Well, so this is a really great question. So I want to unpack a little bit of that, because I would actually put out there that you don't necessarily have to do it all. And it does, I mean, especially if you're on social media and you see other people seemingly do it all. I mean, first of all, it's social media, and you shouldn't necessarily, everybody's putting out a curated version of themselves and you shouldn't necessarily believe it. It's not to say that they're not doing all those things, and maybe they're doing them all really well, but you don't actually see the failures or their actual lives. Are they actually happy? So you don't necessarily have to do it all. And it's funny because I think, I can point to my life, I mean, in a lot of ways, Eighth Blackbird is an anomaly. I mean, like, we put all of our eggs into one basket. Most of us were like really just doing the group, and it worked out, partly because we were doing that. I mean, one piece of advice I give to young groups starting out is like, if you really want to go for it, whatever you think going for it is, if you want to be really successful in a career as an ensemble, you really need to dedicate yourself to that ensemble and have a very clear and shared vision of where you want to go. And that's really hard. And one of the pieces of advice I give to groups starting out too is that, like, everybody thinks like to be successful, you need to have this international touring career and a residency and all of these things. And yeah, that is one measure of success, but another measure is also, we're going to have this group and we're going to do 5 concerts a year locally in our town, and it's going to be a lot of fun, and we'll all be doing other things, but we'll be doing this thing too. And that's also another model of success. So you really have to define what success means for you in any of the endeavors that you're doing. I mean, even for me right now, I mentioned that my wife and I run a chamber music series in Chicago. Neither of us want it to be a big thing. It's okay for it to be a small community thing. And we do like 4 concerts a year, and we do some summer concerts, and that's great. We do want it to be bigger in terms of revenue, and we're applying for 501c3 status, which is another thing I can talk about if people would like. But we don't need it to be an Eighth Blackbird. Like, neither one of us want that. Like, our definition of success is running this series and event, within a couple of years, getting enough money that we're paying all of our guest artists well, and we're paying ourselves a little something, and then keep it going and serving the community. That's our definition of success. So, like, defining success for yourself and whatever that means for you, and not letting anyone else define what that's supposed to be, is really key. Trying to remember the other threads. So that was one thing I wanted to say. Do I find, I guess, like, your question was about, needing to think that you need to do all of these different things. I think that frame of thinking about it can lead to anxiety, because I think like, and it does for me often sometimes too, I'm like, oh God, okay. Usually that has to do with marketing for me. It's like, you know, oh, I put this thing out, but then I have to put it on social media and I have to put it here and I have to tell these people and I have to, you know, and there's ways that you can automate or kind of schedule that so it becomes less anxious. But the point I want to make about it is that, is to try not to think about that as a liability, but as an opportunity. So you don't have to do all the things. And there's a lot of people, like David Lang is a great example, who for many years was just composing. And basically he decided to teach eventually. He didn't kind of really want to teach, but he also wanted to put his kids through college. So he decided to teach. And that was a decision he made. And he's a great teacher. But you know, really he just wants to compose all the time. And so, which is understandable. Or other people like Stacey Garrett, who had a tenure track job and was like, you know, by all means successful, but she wasn't composing as much as she wanted. So she left a tenure track job to be in the great unknown, you know, but because she just wasn't composing enough. And so she's like, okay, I'm going to just talk to everybody and I'm going to do this one thing that I'm really dedicated to, composing. And now she's really successful at that, releasing operas, a lot of pieces. So finding the things that are really meaningful to you that you really want to invest a lot of energy in, because like, I think too much of the time, people feel like, you know, you have to be this jack of all trades, and you don't. Some people naturally gravitate toward that, and that's great, but that's just one path. You can also be the path of like, I'm going to do this one thing, I'm going to do it better than anybody else. And depending on who you are and what those paths are, like don't feel like you have to do all the things. There's so many ways to do the things that you love. It's really just about finding what those things are that you're willing to invest the time and the energy and the money and being the best at those. That for me, but then for other people, again, like, you know, other people might think that like, you know, be happy in a situation where they're doing lots of things. I mean, it's funny because with Eight Blackbird, that was seemingly one job, but you know, it was also many jobs. I mean, within that, I learned to, you know, write grants and do spreadsheets and you know, organize a nonprofit and also teach and conduct. I learned conducting through Eighth Blackbird for various things. And so part of my appeal for that job is that it wasn't just one job. Like I think of like sometimes like an orchestral job where you're just like, you're part of this orchestra and you get the music and you play the music and that's it. Playing the music within Eighth Blackbird was definitely one of the most rewarding parts of it, and like definitely the most forward facing of it, but it certainly wasn't the only part of the job. So like what I really liked about it was that it was many things. And so now what I'm discovering is like, okay, what are all of those things that I really liked? And how much time do I want to invest in putting those out there? So like for me, you know, that means, you know, playing and doing solo concerts. It means collaborating with others on other things. Like I just last week recorded with Dal Niente in Chicago, and that was a lot of fun. It also means doing teaching initiatives. I teach at Longy School of Music. I also run, as Shoshana mentioned, I run my own thing for composers and performers called 121 a few times a year. So, but I've kind of figured out how to piece that together into a career. So it's different for every person, but it's like really don't feel like you have to follow a particular path, or if there's someone saying like, you must do this one thing, or you must do all of these things. It's like, no, you must do the thing that makes sense for you to do. So, and don't let anybody else tell you what that is. Yeah, and Clarissa says, but the other side is if you're a person who is deeply unhappy, unless you're a jack of all trades and master of most, like how do you not burn the hell out? And that can happen even if you're devoted to one thing, you can burn the hell out. So yeah, work-life balance is huge. And I see a number of people burning out, and I've seen also groups burn out too. The biggest piece of advice, and it's gonna sound trivial, but it's really not, is open, honest communication as much and as often as you can with both the people in your ensemble, with the people that you work with the people that you're in relationships with, and also with yourself, like being honest about what you actually want versus what you think you should want or what seems right at the time. The work-life balance is always, it's a juggling act for most people that I know, and nobody gets it right all of the time. But I do see a lot of people, when you begin to know and have a clear idea of what you want out of those different aspects of your life, you begin to have a better idea of also how much time you want and what kind of balance you want them to be in your life. And that changes over time. So, I mean, so for me, I actually prioritized my career with Eight Blackbird a lot. And especially, I'm married now for 17 years and we have a 9-year-old daughter. And I'll be honest, when she was young and it was among the busiest times with Eight Blackbird, that put a huge strain on our relationship. On the flip side of that, during the pandemic, being together all the time was a huge salvation, or not, that's the wrong word, but we came together, we were really, it was a really great bonding moment for all of us as a family to spend that much time together. And it's giving me a deeper appreciation of going forward. I don't want the same schedule that I had with Eight Blackbird, where I'm on the road sometimes 80 or 120 days a year, or half the year. It's just, I no longer want that in my life. And I'm really clear about that. But it took, doing those things sometimes to really figure that out. So it's a very tricky balance. Sometimes you really just have to experience it for yourself before you can really know. So I know that's also not a helpful piece of advice, but yeah. Did that answer the question? That is such a huge question that I'm are there other aspects of that, Jake, that you have
Yeah, sorry, I thought you were
sorry,
talking to Clarissa, but is this better? Can you hear me?
Oh, sorry, it might be on my end. Can you say something?
Can you hear me?
I can, sorry, that was on my end.
All right,
sorry.
No worries. Yes, it did answer my question.
Okay, good. All right. Yeah, that's one of those things. Ask that question often to lots of people.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, it's a good question because you'll get little bits of truth from everybody that might work for you. So yeah, it's just one of those things. No one person's going to have the answer except for you. So
I do have, like I said, I have more questions if
yeah, are there other questions from other people? Or you can type it in the chat if you have one.
I have a question, Nick.
Sure.
Thanks for being here, by the way.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Do you feel like you've sort of gathered some, I guess, best practices for commissioning projects over the years?
That's a great question. Yeah, well, there's certain ways that I like to work. I mean, so a lot of commissions, both with Eight Blackbird and even for myself, tend to come about organically. They're usually people that I've met with, or I've had experience with their music, either playing it already or hearing it at least and meeting them. I don't really cold call anybody to get a piece from them. So when I start, I don't know, I'll answer that question in a couple different ways. Eight Blackbird learned a lot about commissioning through the years of commissioning people. And one of the things was that, early on, especially, people wanted to write all their hardest stuff for Eighth Blackbird. Like, oh, that's the group that they can play anything and they'll practice, everything. So we were getting like all of these fast barn burner pieces, and like a whole concert of fast barn burner pieces is not interesting for anybody, and it's really stressful for us. And until we finally had to be like, like we were talking to a composer, I'm like, can you write us a slow movement? Or like, can you write us something that's like slow? He's like, yeah. So, that's one of my best practices is like when I start talking to someone about a commission, sometimes I have an idea or a project that I'm trying to like, work with them into, but I always want that you have to be careful because I always want from a composer their best thing, whatever that is, the piece that they're most excited to write, which might not be my project. And if they're not that interested in the project, I really, like I always ask, like, does this resonate with you? Does this, spark any kind of thoughts, or do you have ideas about this? Are you interested? And if they're not, that's cool. Maybe we'll work together on something else, or maybe we'll work together down the road. I also really like to tell the composer directly what it is I like about their music, which I find a lot of people don't do. And it can just be really helpful because like then they have something to go off as like, oh, they're really into this about my music. Versus, one of the things that Eighth Blackbird kind of discovered too is that when you commission someone, the commissioner is usually hoping for the last piece that the composer wrote, and the composer is usually writing the next piece. So sometimes you get these things that's like, maybe the composer is going in a new direction, or they're doing X now, or they're not really interested in doing that style or this thing, or that's, done, but like that commissioner or Eighth Blackbird, really wanted that. So I really, so for example, right now I'm trying to work with Pamela Z, and I'm trying to put the money together for that. And, and we worked together on a piece with Eighth Blackbird, but I've also heard her perform. And I told her exactly what I love about her music that I've heard and what resonates with me, and which is kind of a way of saying like, I hope you integrate these practices and ways of doing into the piece for me. And, and I think like, that's always it also just makes the composer feel all warm inside. If you do that, like it's just a really nice place to start from, of like, I really appreciate you in these ways, or I really love your music, that does this and that. And so, and then, so the money talk is a hard one. And there's usually like, everybody doesn't want to be the first person to throw out a number. Nobody really wants to be the first person to do that. So it's also a tricky thing for me. It's a tricky thing for almost everybody, but you just have to start somewhere, and starting with a reasonable fee. I mean, you kind of have to determine what that is. I will say, like with Eighth Blackbird, early on, when we didn't have much money or many connections for people that might commission stuff, we actually negotiated a lot because like we were doing a lot of concerts, and we would negotiate like, maybe a lower fee, but we'll guarantee 10 performances of a work, which still even for established composers is of value. In some ways, sometimes more value than money, because like, you get some big orchestral commission, it gets performed once and then gets, versus like audiences hearing your music 10 times is huge. So we were actually able to negotiate some commissions on a very low scale because of that. So, my piece of advice with that is like, especially when you're starting out, is for both sides, money doesn't always have to change hands. Money is great. Everybody would like money in their bank account, but, there are things of value to both sides, and especially as a performer approaching a composer. And you can even suggest this if you're a composer. It's like, hey, how about a minimum number of performances? Or hey, how about we work into this, that you're going to record the piece? And it might not be as expensive for them or problematic for them to record it as it is for them to come up with a couple $1,000s for a piece. So, or even a couple $100s for a piece. So there's a lot of ways to kind of make art happen without a lot of money changing hands necessarily. Of course, it's always great when money can change hands and we can get, So, and my other piece with all of that is just to be proactive in suggesting ways for it to happen. With Pamela, I suggested a fee, and I also said, look, I don't have this money yet. I'm going to go after it. And like we applied for a grant, like we applied for the From grant recently, but the composer has to apply. But she said, I'm super busy. Can you do this for me? I'm like, absolutely. I'm super happy to like input all this information and here's what I need from you. And so like to be active in that way of like making it happen. So yeah, like in almost any situation, this is like coming up with little bits of wisdom or whatever, I don't know, is I really try, I don't always succeed, but like when you're about to complain about something, to come up with a solution also, rather than just complain about something, is really helpful and focused on solutions rather than on problems. And it's kind of a good way to be, whether that's like within an ensemble or with a composer or with, of always being proactive in that way and thinking about how can this be fixed rather than this is a problem. Because then you're always the person that has all the problems. So anyway, that's a piece of advice that served me well, at least in Eight Blackbird and beyond. So did that answer your question? Yeah, okay, cool. It's a tricky thing, the commissioning dance with composers, but just having again like an open conversation and like about what both parties want out of it is really key. And again, like money doesn't always need to change hands. And I think especially performers, approaching a composer are always worried about, oh my God, this is going to cost some money. Or like sometimes it doesn't even get to the point where they ask someone, they're like, oh, we can't afford to commission, which is unfortunate because there's a lot of situations where people can work together and find those solutions without a ton of money changing hands. And then you have this piece out in the world that, this composer created and it's getting heard. And, so always try to go from the standpoint of like, this can happen versus like, oh no, this is going to be too hard. So that's kind of my advice on that. But yeah. Other thoughts, questions? Yeah, Jake, go for it.
This is kind of along the same veins as the last couple questions, but another thing that I've been thinking about a lot is like the aspect of this that's all about connections and like the who not what thing. So my question, I guess, to try to frame this as a question and stop talking so much about it, what are the like steps that you've taken or advice that you would give to someone about, I guess, making more connections and making more friends? Like I try to think about it as friends more than connections, but just developing relationships, because I know one thing leads to another, but especially for someone who's just starting, like how do you get your first couple things? Like what did you do when your career was just starting out?
Yeah, well, it's funny because a lot of those things are still the same things I do. And a big piece of advice I give to people is being on the scene, which has been really hard during COVID, but now it's starting to emerge out of that. And, we'll be going to concerts again and like, be on the scene in the place that you are, like be, part of the community, whether that's, it's a yes and proposition. It's not just go to the concerts, but also be on Facebook and be on Instagram and, and do things like this. I mean, and like eventually like people see you and know you and get to know your work. And also I find like take an active, you can always spot the people in there like that are like trying to just get things out of it rather than contributing to others. And we avoid those people because they're not cool and they're kind of a drag. But like, if you're there and honest and like trying to help others and taking interest in what others are doing, not just because you should or to make connections, but because of like, because it's interesting and you like their work and supporting their work and giving them a shout out on Facebook if they're doing cool things and like supporting each other is huge. Like this is not a huge community. You can actually know it often seems like it is, but it's really pretty tiny. Especially if you consider it against like the entire classical community, like the new music community is like another tiny wedge of a tiny wedge, which can seem really sad sometimes, but it can also seem really, you can get to know most of the people in it pretty easily. And I mean, even people that seem like big names, like Nico Muley, or, like he's on Facebook all the time, tweeting about tweeting or Facebooking about like what he ate, or I can't find tartar salata, in England or whatever. It's like, you can interact with these people. Like they're people. And, you can be at the concerts and you can listen to their stuff and be part of that community. So like I know that sounds easier said than done. And can sometimes be a pain in the butt. Especially I found like when I was with Eight Blackbird, it was hard to do in Chicago because like for me, Chicago meant home time and family time and not going out to see more concerts and being away from home and my daughter. And so now it's kind of nice. Like I don't have quite the insane touring schedule that I used to. So I can do those. I can have both. Like I can be part of the scene and I can also be with my family, and it doesn't have to be an either or proposition. So, find the level that you're comfortable with. You'll also find as you are part of a scene more, the people that you gravitate towards that will become your friends. And it won't be about, making connections with a capital C, but it'll just be about hanging out and having a good time. And then eventually, often, you'll find like you'll be working with those people years down the road because of that connection that you had. And a lot of those things happen incredibly organically on like every level. Like it really pays to be helpful and nice to everybody. And I know like that's, again, a lot of this advice sounds super trite, but like, I can't tell you, like I was involved with a Longy horn search committee. And it was the first search committee for an institution I'd ever done. And I was kind of surprised they invited me because I just joined the faculty and I'm not a wind player. I was like, okay, sure, I'll interview horn players. And the conversation in the back of, like before we met with candidates about like, oh yeah, this one, yeah, like they present really well, but like, oh man, that person's such an asshole. Or like, or like, and it just like the way that you interact with people, like, I mean, like this one person who I didn't know, but on paper seemed amazing. And all like everybody else on my faculty, on the committee was like, oh no, she's no way. She's horrible to work with. She's a completely bad attitude, like no way. And I was like, wow, I don't know this person, but you guys were all really unanimous in like saying like, she's not right. So like, I think she's not right. When she was like my top pick, and like people just remember that stuff. So, even if you're having a bad day, just being honest with people, like, look, I'm sorry, man, I'm having a bad day. Like, sorry if I'm being an asshole or like just being cool and like, like goes a long way. People remember this stuff, so, and it's hard sometimes too. That's why it's good to find the friends that you have within that, because then you can complain later on. It's like, oh my God, I could not deal with this person today. It took every last ounce of strength to not rip their head off. Like, then, yeah, you vent to those people, but like, So I don't know. Being a good human and being part of and being a good citizen of the community and going to stuff and sometimes you don't want to. Sometimes you want to go home and eat a pizza and turn on Netflix. And that's okay sometimes too. But just know that like people know who come to concerts. Like if they know who supports you and also they know who doesn't. And it's, I've seen that play out in larger decisions about who's invited to a festival or who's invited for a job interview or who's, who gets commissioned and who doesn't. Those things have repercussions that you often don't see. But the people that are nice and that are cool and supportive and part of the community tend to get more of those opportunities. So, yeah. Peter, did you have a question or did you have a?
Yeah, I had a question. I kind of want to go back to the social media conversation that you were having a second ago. Like, I love this idea that you need to be part of the community. Like, you need to be a good person. You need to support your fellow members in the community. I'm curious if, like, I don't use social media all that much. I use it more for zFest than I do personally. Mm-hmm. Is there a way to exist in the world without being super active on social media?
Yeah, yes. And also the thing about social media too is that everybody will tell you like, oh, you need to do all the things. You need to be on Instagram and Twitter, and you need to make TikTok videos, and you need to do this and that. And you don't. You can also just choose one of those things that you gravitate toward more. For me, it's Facebook. I'm also a little bit on Instagram, but I'm mostly not. I'm barely on Twitter. And I'm not at all on TikTok. And like all of those things, like, so if you're not as socially media inclined, I would say still, emails, like people know, even the supportive, it being on the scene then becomes actually even a little more important, because like it's a way to connect a little more. I don't know, like with all of those things, sometimes it just seems daunting. And I've stopped apologizing or feeling like I need to, like, I feel like, oh, I should be on blah, blah, blah more. Like I should be on Instagram more. But then I'm like, do I really need to be on Instagram more? Like, does it matter that much? Like if I just post occasionally, isn't that okay? And largely it is. So like finding what you're comfortable with doing, especially more longer term, is more important. And if that means no social media, but like, more of an in-person presence or helping people over email or, more one-on-one, then like, find out what works for you and find out what's sustainable rather than feeling like you have to do all the things all the time, because that's the way to burn out for sure. So social media is an ecosystem that intentionally made to waste as much of your time as possible to use. Yeah, it can be. Yeah, well, it is designed that way. That is true. But I would also posit that like any tool, I don't know, I like to think with those things. I mean, sure, I get sucked into things, but it can be a tool, and it can be a way to catch up with people quickly, or it can be a way to just see what other people are doing, or if they have a piece, and I'm not physically there, I can check it out, so without feeling like I have to listen to all the pieces that all the composers are putting out. A lot of time I'll just like click on a link and skip around. I'll listen to the first couple of minutes, and then maybe and if I'm really digging it, then I'll listen to the whole thing. If not, I'll skip around. Yeah, that's never useful, but it takes work to use it well because you're going against the grain of the design. It's true. I mean, it's an advertisement platform, and it's designed to keep you there as long as possible. But but you can use it, but it does take practice. And yeah.
I'm curious, just as like a follow-up to that, is Facebook for you also, aside from promoting other people's works and other posts and stuff, like can you direct message people and talk about commissioning a piece through Facebook, or would you save that conversation for an email chain or something?
for more serious things, I do like to, sometimes because there's been situations where I'm friends with people on Facebook, but I don't have their contact info, or I don't, and that's actually happened a couple times with 121, where actually recently our one person that's a guest faculty in August is Kamala Sankaran, who I've gotten to know her music, especially more recently. And we're friends on Facebook, but like I've never actually hung out with her. And so like I initially wrote through her website and didn't hear anything. And then I did it through Facebook Messenger, and then she replied to that. And so this is the other thing that's tricky, is like sometimes different people reply on different platforms to different things and different speeds, and you just have to be okay with that. Because sometimes, like, don't assume that everybody uses all of those things in the way that you use them. However, I do like to take serious conversations, especially about money or anything, to email versus putting it on Facebook, because who knows what's going to happen down the road with Facebook, versus like your email, you can actually archive and have them. Yeah, I mean, things happen like that, but things happen, through Facebook all the time. And for some people, like that's actually their preferred email client even. That being said, I mean, like you don't have to, I don't know, like try to reach people in the way that they like to be reached, and to be patient in certain situations with it. Yeah. But yeah, social media is a tricky thing. And I think it's my experience, and I'm curious to hear other people's perspective. It's better to have more depth with one than to have surface with a lot of them. But the thing is, like, a lot of people now use just Instagram, because Facebook and Instagram are the same thing. Like they'll just post, through Instagram to Twitter and Facebook all at once. And that's one kind of easy way to do it all. But it's also, I find Instagram kind of annoying, because I tend to look at more social media on my computer, and Instagram, like you can't reply to anything through your computer. It has to be mobile, which I find really infuriating. So yeah, but that's just me and how I use social media. So it's all weird.
I do have another question unrelated to all this.
Yeah.
I'm curious about, I suppose, like anecdotally, if you could talk about the first time you went on tour with Eight Blackbird, but also just the concept of designing a tour and how to make that happen.
Well, the first time we ever went on tour was really right at the beginning of when we even formed. And it was really just a series of, hopping from festival to summer festival to summer festival over a 9-week period, and being all together. And we had never spent anywhere close to that kind of time together. And this was like the first year that we were together, after a year of like us kind of actually being like, right when we formed, right after that, two people like had already, like one person went away for a master's at Yale, and another person started working like another unrelated tech job. So like we weren't even really together for another year while people were finishing school. And then we kind of all went together to University of Cincinnati in 97. But that summer of 97, we just packed like from May to August, like 7 different music festivals, and basically just called people up and say, hey, we want to come as a group to this thing. And like, we just kind of, I don't know, just put it out there. And luckily, some of those things cost, some of those things paid. Most of them, we kind of talked our way into being free-ish. So we didn't like lose money, but we didn't make money. So, and it was intense. It was super intense. I mean, we really like dove into the deep end with all of that. And there were definitely like, some tensions, but we also got a lot of work done, and we worked our butts off and learned a lot of new rep and played for a lot of people, and it was great too. So your other question about like, how do you curate like a tour depends on so many things. I mean, again, like defining in the early years of Eighth Blackbird. I should mention, like, after a while, like, so in '98, we won Concert Artists Guild, and that kind of provided management, and then they started getting booking offers, and they would just contact us. So it was less about us curating the tours at that point, and also ongoing after that. But in the other curation I've done, I mean, probably a better example to talk about curation was like when I released an album. And I knew, like, part of my desire for wanting to release an album was to tour it. I didn't want to just release an album and then there was this thing. Like, I wanted to actually, like, go around. And so for me, that meant contacting a lot of the people I had met, you know, through Eighth Blackbird or through Bang on a Can or through other ways, and just pitching them, like, you know, I'm coming out with this album, I want to do this album tour. And so that got me a lot of things. I mean, not different things paid different amounts, and that was actually true with Eighth Blackbird too. But, you know, it got me to, you know, I basically put together 7-city tour of, like, New York and LA and Princeton and Michigan, 2 places in Michigan and Chicago. And some of those things paid well, some of those paid almost nothing. But it was also kind of like wanting to make a statement of, like, okay, here's all this stuff, I'm going to just tour it over this period of time. So that's one way to do it. I mean, the big advice with all of that I can do is is like really thinking about the people and places that you've worked with that are supportive of what you do and your artistry and might be receptive to a concept that you bring. And keep in mind, like, I've found it helpful, I should say, when you approach people, to approach them with a concept or with, like, an idea, rather than, like, you should hire me, or, like, versus, like, hey, you know, I'm premiering this really cool piece, like, I thought your venue would be a great place to do it. I know it also fits in with this other program you're doing, like, doing your research of, like, you know, how it fits in with them and their needs is really, really important as well. And having a conversation with them and knowing that half the time they're going to be like, yeah, we can't really do that this year. You're not having a conversation, you're beginning a relationship. And you want to keep going back to them later and say, hey, you know, like, I saw, you know, like, I know you've been programming this stuff for a while, like, how about this year? Like, and you might make another pitch, like, in a year or in 2 years, or, like, hey, you know, I'm putting together, like, I'm having this concert in this area and you're, you know, only like 150 miles away. How about I do that concert, you know, now, this time of year, like, you know, with a particular angle, and knowing that, like, you're going to get rejection, like, that's just going to happen. But also knowing that if it's the right fit, but the wrong time, like, you can kind of keep having those conversations and keep making people aware of what you're up to, in the hopes of, you know, serving what they do. One example of that is a concert that I was originally supposed to do this last October, but I'm doing this coming October in Florida. And one of my big things of late is when I come through is not to just, you know, give a recital and maybe do a masterclass or something, but also in my concerts to develop, both commission and also arrange works for multiple cellos that I can do with cello students. You know, especially because, like, for new music, like, there's very little multi-cello music. Everybody kind of thinks of Bachianas Brasileiras by Villalobos, which isn't even new. And that's about it. And it turns out there's actually, like, a good number of pieces that can also be, you know, really rewarding. Even if people have, like, very little new music experience, can still be really fun and engaging. And you can engage with a whole cello studio of students and put something together in a couple of days. So, you know, this is what I've been pitching, is really not like, I want to come do a recital, but, like, I want to, you know, tell me about your studio. What kind of strengths do they have? Like, you know, I've been doing these concerts where I engage, like, you know, as few as 2 other cellists and as many as 8. And I have this body of repertoire and we can work together, and, like, I can be there for a couple of days. Oh yeah, and I can also give a talk on entrepreneurship, or a talk about, like, how to form a nonprofit. And a masterclass, and you're kind of, when you're going to a place, you're kind of offering a suite of activities rather than just a concert. Some places you're gonna, you know, if you're talking to a concert presenter, it might be more of just a concert, but it's good to offer, and things that you're comfortable with doing, like offering more of a menu that they can choose from, makes it more appealing as well. So that's some advice. There's a lot of ways, but just know that with a lot of these things, you will encounter probably more rejections than acceptance. Same thing with grants too. So.
Yeah, that all makes a lot of sense, but thanks for that insight. It was helpful.
Yeah. Who is the composer of Power Chords piece? It is, sorry, I'm blanking on the last name. Let me look that up for you. That is, oh man, where did it go? Sorry, trying to look that up. There we go. Alex Bertzos, whom I've never met, but that was part of a larger commission that Matthew Kennedy, who some of you might know, composer, put together during the Georgia Senate runoff. He put together a group of composers that if you prove that you donated some amount to Warnoff and I'm trying to remember the other senators' campaigns, at different levels, you would get these short pieces from composers. So I donated a certain amount and I got 7 new pieces, which was great. So yeah, so I'm premiering 3 of the 7 a week from Monday. I'll soften one. Thank you. So yeah. But yeah, I've never, met those composers actually. Some of them I'm so I actually need to contact them too. I was just thinking about, I made the decision to actually put them on my recital just recently, and I actually need to share, get their opinions on, I haven't even played it for them yet. So yeah, need to do all that. But yeah, it's just all of these commissions were 2 minutes or less. So they're very short pieces, but some really cool stuff. Yeah. Other questions or thoughts or?
I was wondering really quick if your recital next week will be live streamed.
No, I think they don't generally live stream the concerts, which sucks. It would be great if they did. Part of the problem is it's in Mass MoCA Museum. Yeah. And I know especially this year, they just don't have the video capability to do that. Also the sound, because it's a museum space, is really boomy. So it's not the best musical environment. Usually there's recordings after, but it's better when they just get close mics on the instruments and just make a mix from that. Or sometimes they even send me the raw feed and I'll mix it down after that. But sometimes that doesn't even happen. And so I just get this very muddy mix that I kind of can't do anything with, unfortunately. So, and part of it's just a manpower thing. Because there's a lot going on in the museum all the time. This year they're understaffed because of COVID. So yeah. I'll probably be playing all of those pieces though again soon at some point. So yeah. Thoughts on grad school doctorate for music for composition specifically? Because it really depends whether you're a performer and a specific instrument or a composer. There's different schools that are different. Yeah, Jake, it is a live concert. This is it'll be 4:30 p.m. on, what day is that? That's the 16th. Wait, 9th, 12th, 19th. Monday, July 19th at 4:30 p.m. in the Mass MoCA Galleries, Massachusetts Museum of Contemporary Art in North Adams, Massachusetts, if anyone's around. it's a little remote. If you haven't gone there, it's a fantastic, fantastic museum to go to. Getting back to this grad school question, it really depends on what you want to do and who you want to study with. I will say trying to find the places that are free are great, especially, I mean, like, as you know, like one of the ones I'm most impressed with these days is Princeton. Not just because it's Princeton, not just because it's free, but because of the community that I've seen with the composers that are there. They're really, some of them, like I'm actually going, one of them, Pascal Leboeuf, who's just kind of finished up there, I think, is, well, he got married to one of his, people in the community there, but and like so many of the people at his wedding are also people, like it's such a tight knit, close community that I've seen there, even, but that was also true 20 years ago too. And I think that has a lot to do with the teachers that are there. But also, I don't know, like, I think the environment there is really, the composers there are all doing really different things and really interesting things. And they're all amazingly supportive of each other from what I've seen, unlike almost anywhere else I've ever seen. So it's really hard to get in. I think like, 200 or 300 people apply each year and they only take like 2. So it's really tricky. But, again, with all of these things, like, what I'm saying is really amazing about that is community, finding, and sometimes that community stems from the teacher themselves and they build that. And there's a lot of people that do that at a lot of different schools. Like, I think, and sometimes schools you might not necessarily think of, like, I know like Michael Fide at CCM, I think builds that kind of community. I think there's a fair amount of teachers, throughout the country that build that, but it's really about, especially at that level, because like, for your doctoral studies, I mean, yeah, you're going to be taking classes and you're also going to be starting to do other professional things, but you do want to be part of a community and kind of grow your own national, international community at the same time. So having an understanding about what that community is like, talking to people that have gone through the program recently of where you're thinking about going to is key. Also, of course, visiting and getting a sense from, people of what that's like is really important. So it really, not every grad school is right for every person. And it's weird because like, I think there's some places, like I know University of Chicago fairly well just because I've worked there a lot, and I'm still working there. I'm still connected to their department and to the Grossman Ensemble, who's kind of like the new music ensemble right now. And there's a community around that, but it's also kind of a certain aesthetic, I would say, that's not, that, can be the right fit for some people and not the right fit for some people. And, being on the campus of University of Chicago, on the south side of Chicago, where there's not necessarily as much happening. I mean, like the people that I've found that get the most out of that tend to live in downtown Chicago and see more concerts and go to more things because the north side is where most of the concerts happen. So, just kind of having a read of not even just the scene within the school, but also the scene within whatever city it is that you're going to. And those things matter hugely. So I know that's a lot of generic advice, but it's a really tricky question, and also without, I mean, that's just for composers. I mean, for a doctoral degree for performers, again, it really depends. At that level, your teacher really matters a lot. I mean, it matters at every level, but it matters especially because it's at the doctoral level and you're going to be studying for quite a long time. But and also the environment that you want to be in. Different doctoral programs have different, feels and different requirements and different kind of aesthetics. So it's tricky. But yeah. I'm just kind of curious, Peter and Shoshana, like what's the average age would you say, of most of the people at zFest this year?
It's like a good question.
Yeah, we don't take age in the application, so we don't
Right.
We
really
don't
know.
see age.
I think we typically say around a master's degree, so somewhere between 23 and 26. I feel like is where the bulk of our students or bulk of our participants.
But like it's an average, and there's a lot of like we have multiple like established adult people and also at least one person who's in high school.
Yeah, I think our range is 17 to 55 or something like that.
Wow,
So
that's
Did you
huge.
just make up that number? Like what?
I'm pretty sure I actually know the age of the person I'm talking about. I'm not sure if they're the oldest person, but I'm pretty sure 55. But
Yeah, but most people, I think the sense is most people have like a bachelor's and like might be in the middle of master's. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I ask in part because like one of the most frequent questions I get and I see is like, some variation of how do I get on the scene? Like, how do I get my stuff played? How do I make money doing this? How do I, become a professional that is paid for work versus being a student? And it's interesting because I think performers to some degree composers to some degree are at a disadvantage because much of your work is done by yourself versus a violinist, their work is often playing with other people and like they're already building that community by doing that. So I think with composers, like you kind of have to make more of a point to be by myself. Yeah, I mean, well, that's great. I mean, like, but I think like it can be really tricky to build connections when you have like that kind of work. Like, so it's, most successful composers that I know are at least to some degree people persons. Which isn't to say like, if they're really busy or if they're under a deadline, they'll hide themselves away. Sometimes a ton. I mean, like I remember talking to Jennifer Higdon, like when she was working on her first opera, and I mean, like she basically took 2.5 years and wiped out every other commission on her schedule to work just on this opera. So, but that doesn't mean she wasn't also, I mean, teaching can be a way to connect and also make money, and going to concerts and being on that scene. Like pretty much every composer I know like does those things, like goes to the shows, a lot of times when they'd rather be home. So it's, yeah. It's like the I don't know. It's a good thing to be in the habit of doing and of supporting other people's work.
Yeah, I feel like we're starting to come up on the end of the hour. I want to toss out if there are any lingering questions. I feel like now would be a time to throw them out. Also to the 2 people watching on YouTube, if you would like to ask any questions in the chat, we can redirect them to Nick.
Yeah. Yeah, no, like a lot of people here, but still very new. Yeah, well, that's also the funny thing is like, trying to be on the scene and establish yourself and also trying to figure yourself out at the same time. Yeah, I feel that. I mean, I would say, with that, like, that can be part of the process of figuring yourself out and figuring out what you like and what you don't, and the pieces you like and the people you like and you don't like. And it's just experiencing as much of it as you can and beginning to have a direction, both your own compass, like internally and musically and artistically, but also just within life about like the kind of things you want to be involved in, the kind of things you don't. I mean, it was interesting, you know, being in an ensemble for 24 years and kind of thinking that I wanted, you know, I mean, what I wanted personally within the group changed so much over that time. And some of that had to do with things that had nothing to do with Eight Blackbird. Like it had to do with having a wife and having a child and seeing my life and my priorities change because of that. And, you know, I mean, like everybody's always all figuring it out. Nobody, like I don't know, for the most part, if anyone ever tells you they haven't figured out or seems like they haven't figured out, they don't. They're just, they're just struggling differently with, you know, often the same issues and sometimes different issues, but, you know, so it's, yeah, but I do understand like early on, like not necessarily feeling like you necessarily know exactly who you are. And I will say that is one of the benefits of age. I'm 47. I feel like I have a much better idea of who I am, certainly than when I was 27, and what I'm interested in doing and what I'm not interested in doing. And a lot of that's just by having done it and experienced a lot of different people and a lot of different experience and situations and what I'm comfortable with and what I'm not comfortable with. But it took all of that experience to do. So again, like if you're not in the scene, if you're not part of it, if you're not talking to people, if you're not, you know, then you might not know. So that's kind of how it's helped me.
Well, with that, if there aren't any other questions, and if there are, feel free to interrupt me.
I have a, you know, that was such like a like dramatic-ish question to end on, and I have a not very dramatic question to ask.
Awesome.
But, what's something that you want to see from solo cello repertoire that you haven't seen? Because it's such a popular solo instrument to write for that I and for good reason. But is there anything that you think like hasn't really been explored, or maybe is like I don't know. I was going to say, or maybe it's cliche, but I'd rather talk about the things you want to hear than what you don't want to hear.
That's such a great question. To be honest, I feel like, and this is part of the great beauty of the time that we live in, I feel like all the music is being written for it. Like there's no, like, for whatever you like to do, for whatever any cellist, myself included, wants to do on their instrument, there is a composer out there writing exactly that. And it's all happening, and and there's an audience for all of it. Versus I feel like and another beautiful thing that's happening is like, it's never been easier for people to incorporate electronics into what they do. And the barrier for entry, both in terms of the gear, but also in terms of the know-how. You know, you can find instructions online for anything you want to do. I mean, like that's the beautiful thing about Ableton or about, you know, recording, or if you use Reaper, it's like you just go online and you just like, you know, how do I blah, blah, blah. And like in 5 seconds, you'll be exactly, you know, have the information that you need to move forward. So like, there isn't stuff that I feel like is missing. What I feel like is missing is the awareness by the larger cello community of how much insanely cool shit is out there. And like, that's part of one thing. I'm a big advocate for new music from a standpoint of no matter what you like, no matter where you're coming from, there's a piece of new music out there for you. And one thing I love to do with cello students, you know, whether that's ongoing ones or ones, you know, through master classes, is just work with them to identify what that is, like having an idea of what that repertoire, like there's just so much great stuff out there that like, I just feel like there's a couple pieces that kind of get, you know, played a lot, but there's so much more out there and there's so much more being written that it's like, I just feel like the awareness is kind of the issue, not the composition. So that's what I would love to see more of, is just more awareness and advocacy for, and I'm sure that's not true. I mean, It's especially true for instruments that already have a big repertoire to begin with, like piano or violin or cello or flute, for example. Less so with winds, certainly not with percussion. Like they're always searching out for new things, but like instruments with a big repertoire already, I feel like there's still too much concentration on all of the great stuff. And like, I'm not saying like neglect all the Bach and Brahms and all that great stuff. It's just, it doesn't have to be an either or decision. It can be an and. So advocacy is what I would like to see more of. Yeah, great question though.
Nice.
Yeah.
I think then we will at least stop the YouTube stream.
Okay,
Probably.
bye YouTube.